Hi, everyone, and welcome to Can Mermaids Get Drunk? And other important questions about SFF in real life. I'm SB Divya, your moderator, and I'm going to kick off this panel by having the other panelists give us a brief introduction about themselves. I'll just call you all out by name, Zoom style, and go in order of my screen. So starting with you, Ken.
Hi everyone, I'm Ken Liu. I'm the author of the Dandelion Dynasty epic fantasy novels, in which the heroes are engineers, not wizards. A real pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Ken. Amal, how about you next?
Hello, my name's Amal El-Mohtar. I am with Max Gladstone, who I'm pointing at here, also the co-author of This Is How You Lose the Time War. And also I write criticism for the New York Times and short fiction and stuff like that.
Thank you. And next on to you, Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat Leyh. I'm a writer, artist, who I am one of the writers for Lumberjanes. My graphic novel Snapdragon came out earlier this year, and my graphic novel Thirsty Mermaids is coming out next February.
Awesome. Next up on my screen is Max.
Hi, I'm Max Gladstone with Amal. I'm the co-author of This Is How You Lose the Time War, and under my own label, I'm the author of Empress of Forever and the craft sequence of post-industrial fantasy novels.
And last, but definitely not least, Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Roanhorse. I am the author of the upcoming novel Black Sun, very subtly placed behind my shoulder, which comes out Tuesday. I've also written a Star Wars novel. I have a Marvel comic coming out next month, and I'm the author of the Sixth World series.
Thank you. And just a brief introduction about myself. I am an author and the editor of Escape Pod. My novella Runtime came out a few years ago, and my first novel, which I'm very excited to share with the world, is coming out in March of next year. And I'm super thrilled to be on this panel with all these fine people and to dive into some of the more ridiculous as well as serious and dangerous things that we have researched on the path to writing science fiction and fantasy. And so I wanted to start off with the fun question, which is, what is something completely preposterous that you have had to research for one of your stories? And I think rather than putting everyone on the spot one at a time, I'll let you jump in since we're all open. When something comes up in your head, just dive in and then we'll go through.
For me, I had some, so you were so great about sending us questions in advance and stuff. And I was forced to confront the fact that I don't do a ton of research the way that you would have to for a novel, because mostly I've written short fiction. But the moment when I most laughed at myself as I was doing research was during writing Time War, which is a book about time-traveling super spies with multiple realities and basically carte blanche to just invent whatever you want because you have the opportunity to do that. I did find myself trying to figure out for a single line of dialogue whether pound coins were a thing in 1889 or something like that in Britain. And the fact that literally it was an alternate world in which I could just decide that, sure, yes, they were, or no, they were not, totally passed me by. And I just felt like for some reason I needed to know this one thing, even though it bore no actual importance to the thing that I was coming up with.
I also remember a point where I looked up and saw that you were, elbow deep in your phone researching T patterns for like a glancing message mention in the middle of one of the sections.
That's absolutely true. I needed to know that like Mason, like the red China had to be like in distinction to like blue Italian, classic blue Italian or something like that. It was just absolutely crucial for probably, again, a single sentence.
In an alternate universe.
In an alternate universe, exactly.
I got one that's kind of fun. So in my epic fantasy novels, I have these magical fantasy creatures who are dragons that can fly. And the way they fly is because they're filled with lighter than air gas, methane, really. So I had to do a lot of research into herbivores and their digestive systems and just how much gas can be generated within a period of time. My editor who has a habit of deflating my great ideas he described these creatures as hippopotamuses, flying, fire-breathing hippopotamuses. So I have learned a lot more than I ever wanted to know about just how fast creatures can generate fermented gas in their stomach. So if you want to know anything about that, I'm the expert.
I love the idea that he was deflating your gas-powered giant.
I know.
Like, that's amazing. It's great.
I love that. I am probably an over-researcher. In this case, I'm always imagining that the expert in every field that I write about is going to be reading this graphic novel, and they're going to call me out on some mistake that I made, or just they're going to read it and it's like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. So I'm always over researching, and I mean, I'm sure that there are half a dozen really just weird things that I've really gone into depth for. But specifically for Thirsty Mermaids, I read 2 books about treasure hunting, specifically shipwrecks and the history of shipping. The history of bottling alcohol, shipping it, what kinds of ships those bottles would be in, and then researching those ships so that I would know what a shipwreck looked like at the bottom of the ocean. And it was all just like, does not matter. I could have just made it up, but I chose to get really, really authentic for like that one history nerd that might be reading.
I think we all do that. I can't think of, I was trying to think of something ridiculous that I had researched and I couldn't really think of anything, but then someone yesterday on Twitter was talking about my Star Wars novel, actually, and calling me out in a good way for including space chickens. And I remember that when I was doing that, you had to do a lot of research. I did a lot of in-universe research for Star Wars. And one of the things actually that the story group tagged me on is it's like, there's no chickens in Star Wars. And I was like, but we need space chickens. And so I had to come up with another name for them. I can't remember what I called them, but clearly they're poultry, and clearly you keep them, they're domestic poultry, and so clearly they are space chickens.
You can retcon chickens into Star Wars,
I think so.
It's one of the most beautiful contributions to Star Wars lore.
Thank you very much.
Because otherwise, how is something going to taste like chicken, right?
Yeah.
But actually, to Amal's point,
the chicken was lost millions of years ago. A long time ago. But we just still have the term of art. Everybody compares things to chickens. Who knows?
Maybe chickens are like tardigrades, and they spread throughout the universe and survive in vacuum, and that's how we all have chickens. I was going to say to Amal's point about not researching as much because of short fiction. Sadly, I research a ton for my short fiction partly just because I'm a research junkie and it's a great excuse for me to dive into things that I otherwise don't need to read. But I was writing a very short story, fantasy story, where this old man can blow magical bubbles that bring joy to people. And he does it by drinking soap solution. And so I decided I had to research how the soap solution would get from his stomach into his lungs, because otherwise it made no sense. Not that it made sense in the first place. I was like, well, can it absorb through the lining of the stomach and then somehow into the lungs and then it can come out? I was like,
Did you
magic.
actually
It's just
find
magic.
a way? Oh, it's just magic in the end, or
But you can actually, as it turns out, that yes, things can, things do absorb through the stomach lining into the cavities in between your organs.
Huh.
I'm not so sure about through the lungs, but ultimately what I figured out was you can do it all with the blood vessels, because things pass between the stomach into the blood. So if it had to, it could then just go from the blood into the lungs. And these are the, totally useless things that I enjoy researching.
I have to say, I'm already kind of kicking myself trying to make the distinction between the short fiction and long. Obviously, yes, there are. I mean, and I think probably what I was trying to do was make up for the fact that the research that I tend to do for short stories is super boring, because a lot of the research, a lot of the impetus for me for writing short stories, especially recently, has come out of the research that I've been doing for my doctoral dissertation on fairies. So it's a big chunk of my life is academic research, and as a consequence, the creative stuff tends to be a sort of almost antidote to a certain way of thinking about research. So if anything, it's rather than researching for a story, it's I really need to tell a story to make up for all this research,
See, I'm sort of orthogonal to that again. I'm occasionally researching for a specific project because there's some specific thing that I need to know, like how to poison somebody in this particular kind of way. Sometimes you just really need to answer that one question. But by far, the moiety of my research is, either I want to write something about offshore banking, so I end up with a whole shelf of books about it, and then I just slowly read them and accumulate things in that sort of general topic. But over the course of writing a number of books, I've read a whole bunch of eclectic nonsense, and things stick out and then become the centers around which, the grit in the oyster around which the rest of a story starts to accumulate. So you just come upon things and then remember them for later. And that's where most of the weird stuff for me comes on. I knew previously, but was just reminded that clowns copyright and defend their particular distinctive makeup style by painting them on eggs, which are then stored in a particular cabinet at the Clown International. So, what am I going to do with that? I don't know, but something sooner or later, possibly, or not. Who knows?
I knew the first half of that, but not the egg part.
Yeah, there's a cabinet of clowns. Yes. That's how you store the makeup pattern.
I want to write.
Also, the clown organization is the Clown International, which now has me thinking up lyrics for the Clown International. But
so we've gone from ridiculous to actually more ridiculous. I'm going to jump ahead and say, what about the most dangerous thing? Authors are always talking about what government lists we might be ending up on because of our Google searches, right? We don't have the anonymity of going to a library anymore. Everything is stored online. So when have you typed something in and thought twice before hitting enter on, that search query?
Well, not for my mermaid book, but for Snapdragon, the book that came out earlier this year, there's a big portion of the story that involves the rearticulation of animal skeletons. So I researched, which isn't really the shadiest thing you could research, but how to disintegrate the body safely so that you can, the bones stay intact and are, and ways to clean the bones and all of that. So not really suspicious. That's suspicious. I mean, I have a lot of knowledge now, but it was maybe a little upsetting for some people, but it was pretty interesting.
I imagine that every science fiction and fantasy author has Googled how to get rid of a body, or how fast does a body deteriorate, or, what do I do with my neighbor? No, but, something along those lines. So I think we're probably all in trouble. But for me, the most dangerous thing I ever, but the most dangerous thing recently I Googled was I did a lot of research on Aztec weaponry. for Black Sun. I wanted to know, how Aztec warfare in general, and the weapons that they used and how deadly they were. And so I'm not going to make any of those weapons, although it would be, people do. You can find like YouTube videos, homemade weapons that try out on different things. And of course, the famous Aztec weapon is, I can't remember the name, and I would probably mispronounce it anyway, but it was able to like sever a horse's head in one blow. And so those are some pretty dangerous weapons out there, but I don't know if the government's going to look me up for it.
Well, I have something,
you go for
sorry.
it. Ken. No, go for it.
So this is in a totally different direction. For my novels, I needed to describe this alternate technology where capacitors were used as the source of electric power. And so I wanted to really know what it feels like to be shocked by one of these capacitors, especially the early capacitors, which are called Leyden jars. I decided that internet research is insufficient. So I constructed these Leyden jars and I charged them up. And I discharged them on me so I can describe the feeling with accuracy. Well, it's much later I realized this was a terrible idea, very, very dangerous, and it really did hurt. But I'm still alive, so that was good. But also as public service, do not try this. Do not try to do this. It can end very badly. So it's dangerous in that sense. Not because the government will look at it, but you could really hurt yourself.
Don't electrocute yourself, Ken.
Give yourself a heart attack.
Dying for your art.
But seriously, given what I know of the things that end up in your writing, the idea of you method writing any of that is actually extremely upsetting.
Did you see your own skeleton?
I did not, but it felt really, it really did feel like I was being bitten by something very, very powerful. It was painful, very painful.
I got a bad shock when I was very small, and I have a vivid memory of seeing my own bones through my skin, but I think that was possibly painted over by watching too much Looney Tunes at the time. That was the only way I was managing the trauma of it.
Actually, you and me both. I stuck a nail into a wall socket when I was 3 in India, so it was 220.
Oh no!
Oh geez, that was what I was doing. I figured out that I needed to put something in both of the poles of the wall socket in order to actually generate a shock.
I'm so glad you're all still alive. My only memory of when I also somehow electrocuted myself when I was a child, but I saw a very bright flash of blue. Is what I most remember. But the thing that I was going to remember that would actually have gotten me in trouble was not actually an internet search. It was I was writing an episode for Book Burners, for a cereal box project that Max was the head writer on, and I was setting it in the Canadian Parliament. And I live in Ottawa, which is where the Parliament is, and they give free tours and stuff. And what I found myself doing, because it was relevant to the story, was asking one of the people, I can't remember if it was the tour guide or just a member of staff there, if they could tell me about the security guard rotations and when they happened. And just super casually. And then I sort of heard the words coming out of my mouth and rushed to try and say, I'm a writer, I'm trying to write a story. But literally the most inept, Parliament burglar.
Probably the most dangerous to me thing that I've ever researched, as opposed to done in the service of art. It was I don't consider the how to poison someone, how to get rid of a body, do humans dissolve in aqua regia, all of that stuff as particularly dangerous, because anybody who's, the FBI or whoever is going to look at me and be like, he's fucking science fiction, right? Or, what do you expect? And there's not going to be anything that raises any red flags for anyone there. But when I was writing Full Fathom 5, which is a book about a sort of secondary world fantasy offshore banking kind of thing, I did do an awful lot of research into how you move large sums of money and why you would move large sums of money offshore secretly without people being able to follow them if you were, for example, interested in evading taxes or doing anything like that. And that, everybody knows that science fiction writers don't have any money. So I feel like that definitely raised some flags somewhere.
No, I'm impressed that none of you have brought up explosives, because that was the thing I had to research for Machinehood. Specifically, if you set an explosive and someone accidentally hits it with a gunshot, can the bullet make it explode? Because I was like, not necessarily, was sort of my first instinct from a chemistry standpoint. Like, there's probably something more to it. But it turns out that if it is set up appropriately, you can. And as I was researching that, I was like, that's not suspicious at all. The other thing that had me a little concerned was in the process of writing the Machinehood's manifesto, I read through most of the Unabomber's manifesto because I wanted a real example. And I'm going to use that to segue into my next question to you, because the full manifesto never made it into the novel, just pieces. So did you produce anything from your research, like maps or briefs or, physics, math, and equations that never actually made it to print?
I have a book of lamentations that I wrote for Black Sun. That I went through a lot of Mesoamerican poetry because they were huge into poetry. And things like that. And then I looked at, sort of the Book of Lamentations and created a series of lamentations that go into the book because they're mourning like a sort of a genocidal crime against their people. So it makes it in bits and pieces into the book, and it will into the series as we go along. But that was, I don't know if that's what you would call fun, but it was fun for me. That was pretty exciting, actually. Is that weird? That's not weird, right? No.
I'm actually sitting here going, I want to read a Book of Lamentations. I know, right? Extremely
bonus content.
Hashtag 2020.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to specifically ask Max and Amal, did you work out a timeline for How to Lose the Time War? Because how did you keep everything straight? Because I don't think there's any dates that made it into the book.
No, we didn't. So what we decided, instead of like a timeline, as it were, the kind of time travel that we decided on is like a multiverse, so that we could cheat like bandits and just say like, oh yes, now we are in this place, which is not anachronistic on account of alternate timelines and so on. But the main temporal through line is the letters themselves, like that these two spies are writing back and forth. So that's actually like the core of that book is very linear. And just like things are...
There's like a kind of curly Q bit right at the end, but the character line is really linear.
Yeah, exactly. So like when they are in time doesn't actually have much bearing on the narrative, because they are always like one letter is following another and stuff like that. I will say the one thing that I went back and forth on this one thing that was not strictly research, but there was a joke that I made that was just a dumb joke that I made at the expense of the city of Toronto. And then I agonized for approximately 1 year during copy edits about whether or not to keep this joke in, because I have friends in Toronto and I didn't want to like make them sad. So I ended up cutting it and making it more about Ontario in general. But it was, that was like the only, so like it exists in the arcs, but not in the finished copy. So yeah, I don't know if anyone, it's such a dumb joke. It's just like, but there it is. It's hidden forever. You can only have it if you have the arc.
Have the arc, so I'm gonna go.
Oh
no!
The secret's out.
I
know.
Rebecca. Kat, I'm gonna ask you the titular question, which is, can mermaids get drunk? What did your research turn up?
I decided that they could. That was one of the topics that I did not over-research much on because the story hinges on the fact that they can, in fact, get drunk. I heavily implied that they basically drank. The story begins with these three mermaids hanging out in the very old, deteriorated hull of a ship that had been transporting these very old ancient bottles of alcohol, and the implication is they go through it, the three of them, because since they are essentially breathing water, they metabolize the alcohol really fast. And so I just decided that when they come onto land their first night as humans, that's the story. They sneak on the land for more alcohol, sneak on as humans, don't understand anything about dry land, and just get so drunk on the first night because they over imbibe because they don't understand anything about human anatomy that they now have. So that's how I handled that.
Awesome. So I think I'm gonna go around our circle because we've got just a couple of minutes left, and have you tell everyone where they can find you and where they can find your stuff. So we'll start with Ken again.
So the best place to find about me and my books is on my website. It's kenliu.name, KENLIU.NAME, or you can follow me on Twitter. It's KYLIU99.
And how about you, Amal?
So I have a newsletter on Substack. It's amal.substack.com that people can subscribe to for updates and things. I also have a website that is El-Mohtar.com. And you can find me on Twitter when I eventually return from my extremely peaceful hiatus from that site under the name Tithenai, which is TITHENAI.
Great. And you, Kat?
You can find ways to follow me pretty easily if you just Google my name, KATLEYH. My Twitter handle is KAYMLAY. KMLay.
Awesome. And you, Max?
I'm just Max Gladstone, basically everywhere you want to look for me. maxgladstone.com, at Max Gladstone on Twitter when I'm on Twitter, which I'm not now. And there's I think a Substack thing that I may be introducing at some point, but my main email announcements newsletter is off of my website.
Awesome. And Rebecca?
I am at RebeccaRoanhorse.com. I am on Twitter, to my chagrin, at Roanhorse Bex. And I'm just going to sneak in one more plug for my novel, Beautiful Art by John Picasso, coming out Tuesday.
So good.
Thank you. And you can find me at sbdivya.com and on Twitter as at Divya's Tweets. And thank you all for joining us. And please stick around for the next panel and enjoy your Comic-Con. Bye, everyone.
This was super great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.